our next speaker up, and it's Pastor Leonard Stone. And Pastor Leonard Stone is our national leader, as you know. He sees himself as the captain of the team. And it's been a real blessing for myself personally and others to work with him in that way. If I can describe him in just one sentence, he's a servant leader who really wants to do everything he can to empower people so that they can do church better and build the kingdom better. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you, Sid. All right, I had just a picture, a vision just now while we were worshiping, and it was a river that was kind of blocked up. You know, almost like the weavers would come and block it up, and logs and twigs and all kinds of stuff. And it was the picture I had was God is going to show us some specific things in our lives and in our ministries that we just need to remove. Some critical twigs, some logs, and if you remove that, the water is going to flow. And there's going to be breakthrough. But God speaks to us because He's committed. And it's His church, not ours. He puts us there for a season. So what I'm saying is He's committed to His church. And so He speaks to whoever's in charge there. And so I just want to encourage us during this time. If God speaks to us, and when we respond to those things, that's when things start flowing again, and things start really happening. And maybe God put His finger on some stuff last night for us already, for some of us. Maybe this morning during our talk. And sometimes it's not even something that a speaker says. You know that, and I know that. Speaker didn't even say that, but the speaker said that. And you sit and you just know, I need to do that, and you write it down. All right. I want to share with you quickly this morning just something that's really helped me in my own life. And it's this: dealing with failure correctly, or handling failure correctly. Now, obviously, this implies that there's a correct way and incorrect way. I think it's more than that. I think there's God's way and there's the enemy's way to handle failure. The problem with failure in our lives, of course, and failure doesn't necessarily just refer to sin. It can be just trying a new project and it failed. Failure has a way of dampening our spirit and holding us back. All right? And that was something that I battled with. And of course, the enemy uses this very effectively against us. I don't know if you've noticed, he loves reminding us of our past. And he never, I don't know why, but he never reminds us of our successes. But he reminds us of the stupid failures. And all he's trying to do is just to almost throw cold water on us. And even worse, to make you believe that you're a failure. Now, of course, there's a huge, big difference between having failed at something and being a failure. And you've got to clearly see that. You've got to clearly make that distinction in your mind. Because if you don't, you're tempted at times to start seeing yourself as a failure. And that'll completely mess up your future, keep you from what God has for you. And so let's just settle that right from the start. You've got to see that very clearly. Years ago, before I came into ministry, almost 20 years now, I used to be in business for many years, and I thought that was my calling. That was what God had for me. And so, of course, in business, you're constantly trying new things and new products and new ventures and that sort of thing. And the sole purpose is just to make more money. It's the only reason for it, really. And some of those things, some of them worked. We made a little bit more money. And some of them really failed, and we lost a lot of money. And so that's kind of the process in business, you know. But the thing that I battled with, every time something failed and it didn't work out, man, I must be honest, I took it very hard. It was very difficult for me. I took it very personal. I set high standards for myself. And so when these things didn't work out, it was like I was kicking myself and saying, Leonard, you should have seen it. Leonard, you should have known. You see, you're not good enough for this. And man, I would just be heavy on myself. And maybe you found yourself in a similar situation, and maybe not in business, but in church, and you try a new kind of service, and it didn't quite fly the way that you hoped. You try a new department, and it didn't fly. You employ somebody because they're going to pioneer and they're going to do, and it really didn't fly. And all I want to say to you this morning is, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too hard. You know, while we all enjoy victories and successes, and we celebrate those things, and it's great for us, and we all hate failure, and we really don't enjoy it if we're honest, but yet it's a part of life. And we've got to make peace with it, that it's a part of life. Most people grow up believing that mistakes and failures are shameful things and things that we need to try and avoid. And I think the reason for that is purely the way we were raised. And so we grow up at home already believing that, and later on at school, and even later on in the workplace, we are taught to try and avoid failure as much as possible. And so when we fail, which they never told us is inevitable, what happens when we fail? We walk around all kind of discouraged, shameful and embarrassed because look at what I've done and look at what I've been through, because they never taught us it's okay to fail. And that failure is a stepping stone towards success. We've got to see that. And I think this explains why so many people give up on their dreams and their goals. Because on the way to those dreams and goals, what happens? You have inevitable failure, you have setbacks and mistakes. And oh no, we shouldn't. Why does this go? And so what happens? We become discouraged. And we throw in the towel. You know what the problem is? We have the wrong perspective of failure. We tend to think, and this is generally speaking, we tend to think that failure is the opposite of success. So you have success, and if you're successful, it's over there. And failure is exactly on the other side. And what we don't realize, failure is a necessary part of success. It's a stepping stone towards success. Tom Watson, the founder of IBM, once said, he said, if you want to be successful, double your failure rate. I want to work for a guy like that. He was realistic. And I think we need to teach our children this stuff and our grandchildren, that it's okay to fail. And you're going to fail at some stage. It's fun. It's going to happen. Get ready for it. But as long as you do three things. Number one, you've got to be able to admit it. Please, my boy, just put up your hand and say, Daddy, it was me. You've got to be able to admit it. Number two, you've got to learn from it. And number three, don't repeat it again, my boy. Let's do it once. Isn't that so? And you don't have to write those three down because I'm going to give it to you in a moment. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a fourth one as well. But I think it's fair to say that we've all failed at something. And going right back to school, maybe you failed to make the team. Or you failed to make the choir. Thank God for that one. You know, or maybe sorry, Mika. Some of us not cut out for the choir. Or maybe you failed to keep your own New Year's resolutions. Or you failed to be patient this morning in the traffic on the way to the conference. But I think we've all failed. You know why? Because it's a part of life. Failure is very much a part of life, and it's a part of every successful person's life. But we've got to have the right perspective on failure. I think Thomas Edison, whom we'd rate as a fairly successful person, he had very much the right perspective. He said once, he says, you know what, I haven't failed. That, of course, gets our attention. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. All right? And so what is that? Perspective. We've just got to have the right perspective. Now, here's something to remember. Whenever you plan something new, something big, something different, and got a new project, something new, just keep this in mind. All roads to success lead through the land of mistakes and failure. All roads to success lead through the land of mistakes and failure. Every successful person that you and I have ever admired had to go through that land of mistakes and failure. Every breakthrough, every new product, every new invention was preceded by some mistakes and failures. And so we've got to make room for that. But the key is that we don't get stuck in the land of mistakes and failures. And so we've got to move through that, but don't get stuck there. C.S. Lewis once said, he said, Satan's strategy is to get Christians preoccupied with their failures. In other words, what he's saying is they get stuck in the land of mistake and failure. They get stuck in the past instead of moving forward. And so as long as you and I keep on focusing on the things that we should have done and the things that we could have done, it prevents us from reaching the things that can still be done. And we've got to learn to let go of the past, forgetting what lies behind and straining toward what lies ahead. Now, there's some great stories in the Bible of some successful failures, some people who failed and God used them very significantly. What I love about the Bible is it doesn't only give us all their successes, but thankfully it gives us some of their failures as well. I don't know about you, but it helps me because I fail often. And so when I look at that, I think, man, that gives me so much hope. And so, I think of Peter. I mean, you could say Peter the failure, but it wouldn't be right. But this guy just puts his foot into it. He speaks out of turn. Then he wants to walk on the water. And Jesus says, come. And then the guy is sinking. And man, this guy is just blowing it left, right, and center. And this is the guy whom when Jesus says, will you guys pray with me? He's one of the first guys who falls asleep. This is the same guy who acted impulsively and just cuts off the high priest's servant's ear. And so you look at this guy's life and it just seems like there's failure and mess and everything. And yet he's in the inner circle. He's one of the three. You think, how does that work? How can Jesus choose somebody like that? It's the same guy who disowned Jesus on the night of his trial. Instead of telling everybody what a good man he was. And I was there, I saw it, I saw the healings, and I saw the miracles. I witnessed it with my own eyes. I saw this guy just wanting to help people and just be good to people. And so instead of him speaking up and saying what he saw, he denies his closest friend. And yet Jesus has him in the inner circle. Now, if we were to rewind a little bit, go back a little bit, Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew this guy was going to blow it and he's going to deny him and everything. And yet, Jesus says this of Peter. He says, you are Peter, and on this rock, he calls him a rock, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not overcome it. He says, I've got a plan for your life. I am going to use you. He says, I will give you the keys of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. In other words, he says, you're going to be instrumental in building my church, and I'm going to give you authority like nobody has seen. And God uses this guy. And he becomes the great apostle Peter to the Gentiles. Just amazing. God uses him so powerfully. Somebody once said, God uses people who fail because there aren't any other kind around. After Peter denied Jesus, we know the story. The Bible says he went away from there and he wept bitterly because he knew, today I've blown it in the worst possible way. And so he goes away and he weeps bitterly for what he had done. And of course, you fast forward the story. Jesus is crucified, put in a tomb. 3 days later, he rises again. Some women go down to the tomb early that morning with some spices to pay their last respects. They get to the tomb. They find the stone's been rolled away. The tomb's empty. Jesus is gone. And there's an angel sitting there. And the angel says, listen to this, and the scripture will be on the screen for you. Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He's risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. Now listen to this, because this is the amazing part. Verse 7. But go tell his disciples and Peter. So he says, hey, you better go and tell what you've seen. And don't forget to tell Peter. He has to hear. He needs to know what you've seen. Now remember, these angels act on instruction from God. And so God wanted Peter to know, hey, it's not over. It's not done. Still got plans for your life. And so, of course, we know the rest of the story, how Jesus meets with him sometime later on the beach, recommissions him around that charcoal fire and uses him very powerfully. Here's what I've learned. With God, failure is not final. Failure is not final. God uses that in our lives. And we look back at times at our failures and our mistakes and our mess-ups. And it's only when you look back that you realize, hang on, that was a blessing in disguise. God has used that. God has made good come out of that. Oh, friends, God uses people who fail. And you can fill in the rest, because there aren't any other around, all right? I love studying the stories of famous failures. I think it's because it helps me. I think of Bill Gates, a Harvard University dropout who started that software company with $50. He didn't have some big inheritance, some people behind him, $50. Hasn't turned out too badly, I think. Two authors, Mark Hansen and Jack Canfield, these guys are the co-authors of the book Chicken Soup for the Soul. And so these guys went to 50 different guys to go and publishers to try and publish this book. And 50 publishers turned them down. Just looked at the concept, looked at the book, no, it won't work. And so can you imagine going from one to the second to the third? Well, they went to 50 different ones. Eventually, somebody said, all right, let's give it a shot. And they've sold 73 million copies of that book. I think of the artist Van Gogh. Apparently, they say he sold one painting during his lifetime. One painting. Now his paintings are setting records for the amounts that they fetch at auctions. Thomas Edison was considered unteachable as a youngster. Isn't that crazy? Albert Einstein was told by a Munich school teacher that he wouldn't amount to much. Most of the famous people that you and I know and that you and I admire, and we look up to them and we look up to what they've done, they've been through the land of mistakes and failures. But here's the thing. They didn't get stuck in the land of mistakes and failures. They kept on going. They kept on moving forward, and they didn't see themselves as failures. There's a big difference having failed and being a failure. And so how do we handle failure? What I want to do quickly is I want to give us just 4 steps. I told you I was going to give you 4 steps quickly. And so let's look at just quickly 4 practical steps. How do we handle failure in our own lives? And the first one is you just got to give yourself permission to fail. I think it's so important that we just somehow we make room, we make peace with the fact that failure is a part of life. It's a stepping stone towards success. And you can't have success without that. It's not a shameful thing. It's not an embarrassing thing. It's not something that I've got to try and avoid at all costs. All right? I've got to go through it at times and so on. And I'm not intentionally and willfully just going to be stupid and fail. I mean, I'm not talking about that. But we're going to have to go through some failures at times. And so when we fail, not if we fail, when we fail, how do we handle it? Bible says, though a righteous man falls 7 times, he gets up. We get back up again. We dust ourselves off when we go. But now here's the problem. Most people do that. What's a big deal? They get back up. Problem is they get up discouraged, disheartened. Isn't that? Disillusioned. And so they get up, but they don't really go for it anymore. And so that's the difference. When you and I get back up, we get up with passion and excitement and, okay, that didn't work that well. Let's go again. Let's try again because I've got victory in front. I've got success coming and I may stumble again, but I'll get up again. That's the difference. It's our attitude. All right. Let's move on quickly. Next one. How do we handle failure? Give yourself permission to fail. And then the next one is you've got to own it. You've got to own it. In other words, you admit it. It's one of the worst things when our children come and they've blown it in some way and they just won't admit it. All we want them to do is just say, Daddy, it was me. It was me. And that's what it means to own it, where we just say, you know what, I blew it. It's my fault. Or I played a big part. It wasn't entire, but I played a big part. And so on Team With Us, we've got a thing that we just say, just put up your hand, for heaven's sake. And not in worship. It's like, don't shoot me. But man, I've got grace for people who do that. When they just say, it was me. Okay, no problem. Let's move on. I hope you've learned from it. Let's move on. But why don't we do it? Because it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault I lost my job. It wasn't my fault my wife walked out in the marriage. Wasn't my fault they misunderstood me. And so that's our problem. And so we end up shifting the blame rather than taking the blame. And the reason we're so good at this thing is because we relate it to 2 biblical characters called Adam and Eve. All right? Now listen. They didn't have the 10 commandments back then. It only came much later on, as did Edgar's and Woolies. I'll show you why in a moment. But just remember Edgar's and Woolies. All right. So in any case, they didn't have the 10 commandments, but God gave them a couple of instructions. And He gave them one commandment. Now listen to the instructions, and it's on the screen for you. Genesis 1:28. God blessed them and said to them, here are the instructions. Be fruitful and increase in number. What does that sound like? He says, go have babies. All right. Not too bad an instruction. And then the next one, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And so God gives them these 2 instructions. He says to them, I want you to be fruitful and I want you to rule. Now here comes the command. Chapter 2, verse 16, the Lord commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so God gave them one commandment. God basically said to them, you can run around naked in the garden all day long if you want, no problem. And you may have to because there ain't no Woolies or Edgars yet, all right? So God says, you can go ahead, you can do that, but you see the tree over there. I don't want you to come near that tree. Are we clear? Yes, sir. And so what happened? They did exactly what you and I did when we were children. we gravitated toward that one thing that we weren't allowed to do. All right. And they went and ate. You know the story. And then they hid. The Bible says here in Genesis 3 verse 8, then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of day, and they hid from the Lord among the tree in the garden. It's amazing how the Bible, first book in the Bible, Genesis, reveals something in our nature. When we blow it, when we fail, when we make some mistakes, instead of putting up our hand, instead of owning it, instead of saying, it's me, what do? We go into hiding. We try and cover the thing up. And so you'll find it, somebody will lose their job. Hey, what happened? No. I was tired of that job. I had enough of that job. And it's the end of that season. I really sensed God is moving me. And tomorrow you hear they were fired. It wasn't God moving them, it was the boss booting them. All right. But what do we do? And we laugh, but we're kind of guilty in this as well. We hide the truth because we battle to do this. Just put up your hand. Just put up your hand. And unless we do that, we're not going to grow. We won't grow through that thing. And so God comes to Adam. And God says to Adam, Adam, did you eat of the tree? And of course you know what he said. Absolutely. Guilty is charged. I'm responsible. Do with me whatever you like, but please leave Eve out of it. She had nothing to do with this. All right? That's what he should have said. And if it was a movie, that's what the hero would have said. But it's not a movie. It's real life. In real life, we don't do that kind of stuff. Somehow, I don't know why, but we do the hiding. We try and hide why we lost our job. Hide why this, hide why that. And then if the hiding doesn't work, guess what we do? Then we start blaming. But we're not owning it. Just put up your hand. But this is the part we really battle with. And so, of course, eventually, he says, it was Eve. And Eve says, well, it was a serpent. And the serpent, well, he didn't have much of a leg to stand on. All right. Listen, friends, unless we own it, we will not grow through it. You will go through it, but you will not grow through it unless you own it. And so he'll get fired from his job, and he won't own that he messed up. And so he'll go through it, go into the next job, but he's learned nothing because it wasn't my fault. Where if back here he'd put up his hand and said, you know what, I think I could have handled it differently. Maybe they weren't quite fair, but I think I could have handled. I'm owning my part, and maybe even a little bit more. I'm telling you, they're going to the next job, different story. And so what happens? We don't just go through it, but we grow through that thing. And so the moment you put up your hand and you own the thing and you say, man, this is mine, two things happen. That's when a negative experience becomes a learning experience. And that's when progress is accelerated in your life. Suddenly, you start growing. Suddenly, you start going forward. But it had to get to the point where we own it. And I think as leaders, this is extremely important because we set the tone in our homes and on our teams. And I've had times where I've had to say to the guys, I didn't handle that well on Sunday. It's my fault, I'm sorry. Or something crashed in a service, didn't go well because I didn't organize it well. I've had to say, guys, it's my fault. I didn't handle that thing well, or I didn't plan it correctly. All right. So how do we handle failure? We give yourself permission to fail, and then own it, and then obviously the next one is learn from it. We've got to learn from our failure. We tend to think experience brings wisdom, but it's not really true, because you see, it's evaluated experience that brings wisdom. Evaluated experience. How many times have you seen a family member mess up and you think, man, are you crazy? Didn't you learn the last time? Obviously not. Why? Because experience doesn't bring wisdom. It's evaluated experience. And so I think one of the best habits you and I can develop is just to pause and to reflect. To pause, to reflect, and to evaluate. This is something that I do almost every single evening, if I remember. Go to bed at night. When I switch the light off, I lie there for a couple of minutes and I reflect on the day. And I don't think of all the great things I've done, and I think of people, because that's what matters, and my interaction with people. And so that's where I start. I think of the different people that I interacted with, and then I ask myself, the things you said to those people, were they positive? Were they encouraging? Were they upbuilding? The things you did, are you proud of them? Would you mind if it was played exactly the way you did it, played on screen on Sunday so the entire congregation could see? Are you proud of it? Would you repeat that again? And then lastly, my time. I look at, did I spend my time wisely? Did I waste a lot of time today? Man, I shouldn't have done that. And I just, before I knew it, the afternoon was gone, or something like that. Was I productive? And so I look at people. What did I say? What did I do? And time. Those things. And I go through that because I've learned reflection turns experiences into insight. Reflection turns experiences into insight. Because you see, if I go to bed and I wake up tomorrow morning, I'll probably repeat the same stuff that I did yesterday. Probably make the same mistakes. But by reflecting, what happens? Turns it into insight. And insight becomes learning down the line. Without reflection, no insight. Without insight, no learning, no growth. And that's where we repeat the same mistakes over and over and over. And it becomes a pattern in our lives. It becomes a pattern. And so we've got to break that. All right. Here's the last one. Don't repeat it. Now, I'm not going to say much on this point, except this. Don't repeat it. All right? Only a fool makes the same mistake. And that means I am a fool because I've made that. But I don't want it to become a pattern. And sometimes we've got to make the same mistake 2 or 3 times. But by reflecting, we realize, come on, man, how many times do you still want to make it? And then we got to change. And so I've quickly shared this with you this morning because it's something that's helped me. And having the right perspective on failure has really freed me and empowered me to go for it, to try new things. And to say, man, it's okay if it fails. I'll get up, we'll go again. That didn't work well. Let me reevaluate. Let me try again. And so it's something that's really helped me. I don't battle with that anymore. As a matter of fact, I'm far more willing these days to try things and to fail and to go again. I think if we're going to make progress in God's kingdom and we're going to take ground, we're going to have to risk. We're going to have to do new things. We're going to have to dare. And God's going to give you ideas. And I'm telling you, the enemy, and it's a God idea, you don't even realize it. And the enemy's going to whisper in your ear, what if it fails? Well, then I get up again. We try again. Maybe you find yourself today and you're right in the middle of a failure. And if that's the case, I want to encourage you, don't get stuck in the land of failure and mistakes. Don't focus on the failure. Focus on where you're going. Focus on the future. And you keep on doing that, you're going to keep moving forward. And that's when that failure becomes a stepping stone in your life. And maybe for the rest of you, maybe you're saying, well, I'm not going through a failure or anything at the moment. That's no problem. Your turn's coming. All right? But the next time you fail, the next time I fail, own it. We put up the hand. Then we learn from it because we've reflected, we've evaluated. And I'm telling you, you do those two main things where you own it and then you learn from it. Those two things. And you know what happens? You come through that thing wiser, smarter, and more mature than you were before. Amen. Bless you, man. We're going to have a good time together.